Welcome back to Outside the System, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Calley Means, the founder of True Medicine. Quick disclaimer before we get into the episode. I made a small investment in True Medicine a couple months ago, so just wanted to make sure everyone knew that before we dive in. We spent most of the episode actually talking about our food system, health problems that Americans face today, and how the two are related. We didn't actually spend that much time on True Medicine, but we definitely spent the majority of the time talking about the problem. True Medicine is working to fix that problem, and if you listen to the end, you'll hear how exactly they're doing that. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Calley, thanks for joining me on the show today.
So great to be here, Neil.
Yeah, so I think you and I met maybe a few months back. This is actually the first time we're talking live, but we met via email through Justin because of the company that you're working on, True Medicine, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point on the episode. But, I personally, when I first heard about what you were working on, I was like, this is very much needed. I think around that time, I had just done an episode with CrowdHealth, which is one of the most popular episodes that we've done on this show. So it was just kind of like thinking about these outside the system healthcare solutions. And, then I've followed your journey since then, and you blew up on Twitter this week. So let's maybe start there. And you can talk about True Medicine as well and what you're building. But I think like you're without stealing your thunder, your thread was super, super interesting. So I want to maybe start at that point.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, for a while I've been starting companies, and as you said, just started a company with Justin Mayers to change these healthcare incentives. But as we've been doing that, I was thinking back on my early life, and I was born and raised, as you could say, in the swamp in Washington D.C. And growing up, really thought I was going to be in politics my whole life. I was very, very ideological, very driven by trying to help America. I think for the right reasons. And early in my career, after graduating from college, I worked on some campaigns and quickly learned that when the campaigns are over, people from the right and the left, they go to consulting, these public affairs and various consulting groups. And as I've been really become passionate about our broken food system and I think relatedly our broken health system, having flashbacks to being in the room with processed food and pharma executives. And to me, honestly, last week I was feeding my newborn, my new son a bottle, and didn't really think this Twitter thread would blow up. I thought it was kind of obvious, but it did. I shared some reflections on the playbook I saw, because I think these companies really executed a playbook from being inside the room earlier in my career. I think it's very relevant to today, and it really seemed to resonate, because I think a lot of people are frustrated looking at what's happening to kids, looking at what's happening to the health of Americans. 50% of adults now having prediabetes or diabetes. I think something clearly wrong is happening, and I think people are beginning to understand it goes to our food system. So yeah, can dive into kind of the playbook I saw specifically working with Coke.
Yeah, well, definitely. And I think what it kind of comes down to is how a lot of these companies are using government as almost government and public opinion as a instrument to just essentially increase their profits at the expense of, people's health. And, I think you mentioned this in the thread, but there's elements of like the culture war here where people are, these organizations and these companies are trying to essentially leverage and call their opponents racist for doing certain things. So
right.
I'll let you kind of dive into the playbook that you saw, and then would love to also see how it's applied to other things beyond just you use Coca-Cola as an example, but I'm sure they're not the only company following this playbook.
Yeah. So here's kind of what I saw. And I think we all know it's not news when the system's rigged, but I think what's notable, and I think people don't fully understand, is how there's a strategic effort to rig the systems of trust, these nonpartisan systems of trust. So Coke, it was very interesting. It was 2011, 2012, and the issue is food stamps. So food stamps is a $110 billion government program that 15% of the American people rely on for nutrition. It's very important. For a lot of Americans, for millions of Americans. And shockingly, 10% of all food stamp spending goes to sugary drinks. It's the number one item purchased on food stamps. In total, 70% of food stamp spending goes to processed food. This obviously makes no sense. It does not make sense to be, subsidizing, addictive, non-nutritious, sugary drinks that are just diabetes bombs. which really hamper, those communities. If you subsidize drugs for me, I would probably be addicted. It's like these are addictive drugs that are really doing destruction of the body. And then, of course, from a public policy perspective, that's causing trillions of dollars of downstream health issues. So this obviously made no sense. But Coke wanted to keep the status quo. Obviously, $10 billion of food stamps is spent on soda and sugary drinks. So there's three parts, as you alluded to. What was shocking to me is that it's very bad optics to me. You had, these PR consultants, old, white guys at Coke calling the NAACP, a leading civil rights group. And the meetings were shockingly transactional. It was, we're going to give the NAACP, Coke is going to give the NAACP millions of dollars, and you need to call our opponents racist. In this case, the opponents that Coke was calling racist were parents at various groups that were concerned about kids eating too much sugar. So once you call someone racist, it shuts down the debate. And there's reporting in the New York Times 2012. This is still done to this day, where groups are paid, it's really Orwellian to call parents racist. Parents trying to not have their kids eat 100 times more sugar than they did 100 years ago. The second group is think tanks, which are very influential in DC to create policy. I was an intern at the Heritage Foundation early, in college, and that was kind of the big, conservative think tank of conservative thought leadership. It's totally pay to play. I watched pharma executives, soda executives go in there. They get a study, saying that we shouldn't be reducing drug prices, probably saying now, right, that we need to cure obesity with, medical innovation on these, injectables for kids. It's pay to play. And you get a lot of protection on the right. And this kind of goes into, I think, what's very relevant today. I was floored that research institutions, that universities are essentially public relations departments for special interests. As a junior person at one of these, public affairs companies, I was pulling lists of professors for pharma companies who have spoken out or conducted research on opioids or conducted research on, various other drugs that were of interest. And then pharma takes that list, they create a donation plan. For instance, the president of Stanford Med School at the time in 2010 was a pain specialist. Pfizer and other opioid companies donated millions of dollars to Stanford, and they pushed the NIH to make him the chair of a opioid panel, which was then stacked with a bunch of other professors at various universities who have been paid off by opioid makers. And that opioid panel recommended loose guidelines for opioids, which has led to total devastation. But that's how it works. And just to kind of close the loop on how it's relevant to today, I think we can talk a lot about pharma, and I think it's well known, but I think honestly needs to be better known just how rigged these studies are, that lead to certain recommendations. Instead of healthy eating or exercise, taking drugs, the more statins we take, the more heart disease goes up. The more,
how convenient they happen to sell those products.
Exactly. But it's funny on the nutrition front. We steered a lot of money, and I saw a lot of money get steered, 10 years ago to different nutrition studies. Processed food companies spend 11 times more on nutrition funding than the NIH. And just in the past year, the landmark NIH study just came out with Tufts University, funded millions of dollars, called the most comprehensive nutrition study in history, funded as well by food companies. And it had some groundbreaking reports, such as Lucky Charms being 3 times more nutritious than an egg, and Honey Nut Cheerios being more nutritious than beef. So that's the type of that would be funny if it wasn't. It's weaponized by food companies. Pharma turns a blind eye because they're profiting from the devastation that's being caused by the American diet. And then these studies with an NIH stamp are being used to create school nutrition policy, food stamp policy. It's actually, in my opinion, this is what Justin and I really are working on. I think it's the biggest issue we face because it's a first order issue because our brains and bodies are under threat.
Yep. And I want to definitely get to that in a second is kind of the scale of the problem today. But one thing I'll say is, there's a huge distinction that I think is missed, especially by, and this is unfortunate, but like folks without a scientific background, they have they're almost like overconfident in how science works. And I think there is a difference between science as a practice and science Inc., which is kind of what you're talking about, right? And for anyone who's kind of curious to learn more about this topic, there's a great book called Merchants of Doubt, which is actually this very similar playbook. Merchants of Doubt is how this playbook was kind of applied in tobacco for a number of years. And, that's another tangent we could go on. I actually think that a lot of these food companies are way worse than actually what the tobacco companies had done in the past, if you just look at it. But anyway, that's a tangent. Maybe we'll skip that tangent. We'll save that for another episode. But this book basically goes into that playbook, and you see the same exact things that you're talking about, where, people are essentially, it's pay to play, and using that pay to play strategy, you can kind of fend off any kind of regulation or any kind of pushback on your products. And, that seems like that's a timeless playbook, is essentially using government and these institutions to further your goals.
100%. And I think the thing to underline, tobacco did this, and it's just, when you see a news article or a news segment touting a new peer-reviewed study, this shouldn't need to be said, but it's everyone still falls for it. It's almost like unimpeachable, and looking back, earlier in history to the 1990s food pyramid, which was probably the most destructive public policy guidance given, I would argue, in American history. You can Google this, and it's widely reported. The foundational research of the food pyramid was research from Harvard, and it was the head of the nutrition school, studies that said that sugar didn't cause obesity, and that was directly funded by the sugar companies. Again, you'd think this doesn't happen anymore, but now we're being told by the NIH that Lucky Charms is better than an egg. So this is still happening.
Yep.
And we just, to me, and I gotta be honest, I've been on a journey here, and a year ago I was very despondent. I really am. I do think we have big challenges. I think it's a message of optimism. I think it's a message to patients. You're never going to get it perfect, but you should question things. You should be an empowered patient. I think the American patient has been gaslit over the past 40 years.
Absolutely.
In the wake of the American people getting, sicker, more depressed, fatter, more infertile at an exponential rate.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those statistics, actually. I mean, you shared some. I had done some more research prior to us jumping on. Diabetes, life expectancy, sperm counts. I mean, let's talk about some of these stats. Like, what is the scale of the problem that people face? Because I think there is a little bit of what's it called? Like when like the boiling the frog or something. Where definitely. People are, it's like incremental every year, and it's not like, it's not like all of a sudden sperm counts fell by 50% in like 1 year, right? Like it's like every year it's gradual, but it just accumulates every single year to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. So in a high level societal issue, I think this is, and I'll drill down to the individual. So here's kind of how I think about it. I think a lot of people, maybe even some doctors, don't actually fully understand it, and me for a long time, the physiological, like what diabetes is. We hear this term diabetes. It's like diabetes is cellular dysregulation. Diabetes is like the energy of our cells, like use the mitochondria is glucose, right? And that comes, we actually don't need it from food. We produce it, but like it comes from food. We're eating 100 to 150 times more sugar than we did 100 years ago, ever throughout human history. We're also, the foundation of our diet is processed grains. Processed grains are a new invention in the past 100 years. And the processing is, and this is, again, a new invention. They take the fiber out of the whole grain. So it's literally just like the inner core that just turns immediately into sugar when it hits the bloodstream. And then inflammatory seed oils, which have gone from 0% of the American diet because they didn't exist 100 years ago, to the main source of American fats, which are highly inflammatory and produce, worse glucose and other responses in the body. So that's what our food is. And when that's entering our body, right, it's causing cellular dysfunction. The cells, when they get too much glucose from the processed grains and the incredible amount of sugar we're eating, that it kicks it out of the cells, and that causes fat, and it causes a lot of other dysregulation. So everything we're seeing is upstream of that. Obesity is just one symptom of that. But diabetes, it used to be called adult onset diabetes. It used to be, a very small percentage of the population. Now 25% of young adults are pre-diabetic.
And that prediabetes is just an arbitrary marker on the blood sugar dysregulation. 93% of all Americans have some component, some biomarker of metabolic dysfunction. So our cells are literally malfunctioning. And when you peel back the onion, obviously heart disease, diabetes. I mean, that should be obvious to most people. If we got those three ingredients, sugar, processed grains, and seed oils out of our diet, we wouldn't have diabetes and heart disease. But it's more than that. It's kidney disease. It's respiratory diseases. It's dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia and Alzheimer's in recent groundbreaking research has been called type 3 diabetes. If you have normal blood sugar levels, if you have normal metabolic biomarkers, you essentially have no chance of getting Alzheimer's. This is a lifestyle disease. And additionally, a huge drive for me is like my mom passed away of cancer abruptly in 2021. Pancreatic cancer. She was one of the 50% of Americans who suffered from blood sugar dysregulation, pre-diabetes, and many cancers are highly tied to blood sugar dysregulation. Pancreatic cancer, it's a 90% correlation with pre-diabetes or diabetes. You essentially have a close to 0% chance of getting many leading forms of cancer if your blood sugar is under control, which, up until 50 years ago, almost every American had that. So I think, when you look societally into what's happening here, a lot of people are sicker. And then a lot of people go, people our age, they go, well, people in their 20s, 30s are healthy. I don't think we actually are. There's anxiety, there's depression, there's fatigue, there's massive infertility issues. And the one thing I'll just say, and I'll kick it back, is there's a great book from a Harvard researcher who's kind of gone against the grain called Brain Energy that just came out. And it actually very convincingly argues that bipolar disorder and a lot of mental health diseases are actually highly tied to metabolic issues, to food. Makes a very compelling case. And that's another important point. This sharp increase in depression and all these mental health issues, 20% of our cells are in our brains. And when cells are dysregulated, bad things happen. So that's just where I kind of set up the societal level. It's like, this is a first order issue. If our, I don't know, I have a young son, but any parents who have kids in, grade school or high school, I'm not hearing that they're super optimistic about what they're seeing with what's happening with kids and their developmental and their behavioral issue. There's something happening, and it relates to food.
I mean, you mentioned this in a previous interview that you've done that I was listening to, and you called it wasting our human capital or destroying our human capital.
Yeah.
When you, and if you think about it, right, like, I don't think any reasonable person who you talk to on the street would say that, pizza is a vegetable. Mm-hmm. But in order to meet, school lunch requirements, the government tried to make that happen and classify pizza as a vegetable because of the tomato sauce, which is wrong on multiple levels, right, considering tomatoes aren't even vegetables. So there's issues with that on multiple levels, but it kind of comes back to like, these are kind of captured interests. And I think there are people out there who think that these entities are out there protecting them or in looking at their health as their primary focus. And I think the evidence kind of, especially, your thread kind of made this completely exposed, but it seems, there are obviously other interests that are higher priority for them. So to your point on all the things that have kind of happened over the last 40, 50 years from a health perspective in America, obviously it's a combination of factors that led to that. What would you say, why did this happen? Like, what changed 40, 50 years ago? Right. Or what was kind of the cycle that made that happen?
Yeah. So number one is a food system that is poisoning Americans. And I think the most important link that's important to understand is you have a medical system that profits off interventions. And profits, the medical system, every institution, from the med schools to pharma companies to hospitals, every paycheck is paid when interventions on sick people happen. When people are healthy, they lose money. So it's a food system that's poisoned Americans and a medical system that has stood silent. So just quick history here. There was a big emphasis on more industrial farming techniques, and the two or three, I would say, as we talked about, massive farming techniques is like monocropping to do grains, to put into packaged food that can stand on the shelf forever, to take that fiber out, which rots, which goes stale. So when you take that out, the grains are more stable. You mix them with seed oils, preservatives, and that stays on the shelf.
You
And
have a
that's
long
70%
shelf
of the
life.
American diet. That's 70% of the American diet. So we made a choice. Now, that wasn't a cost-effective choice because it's been a disastrous for the budget of the United States, right? It's a complete fallacy to say that we couldn't shift our farming practices, and have a more whole food policy or serve, more whole food even among lower income communities. There's nothing more expensive. The reason the United States is going bankrupt as a country is because of lower income people who have diabetes. I mean, they're costing the system millions of dollars each with their different comorbidities. So we shifted the food system.
Oh, and the pharma companies are loving that because it's essentially a subsidy it's a transfer payment actually from the government to pharma companies.
Exactly. And what happened is in the 1960s, the birth control pill came on the scene. And the birth control pill actually was the first chronic treatment. Until 1960, nothing in medicine was for chronic. Every medical miracle, I think this is very important to any medical miracle we can think of, I bet it's a acute solve, something for acute issues, which is something that's going to kill you relatively imminently, discovered before 1960. Antibiotics, vaccines, emergency surgical procedures for childbirth and other dangerous things, appendicitis. The things that are really like have propelled life expectancy forward are almost all for acute things. But the problem with acute conditions, antibiotics, pharma companies lost interest in antibiotics in 1960. There were more antibiotic strains discovered, I think, before 1960 than now. It's complete because it's solved right away. It's not recurring revenue. The birth control pill actually show, oh my gosh, we can have somebody on for years. And actually the Sackler family, the grandfather of the person that did the opioid thing, marketed and patented Valium and these benzos. And by the late 1960s to 1970s, 25% of American women were on one of these benzos, the Valium. And there was crazy marketing practices. And that's continued to this day. There's a constant search to figure out and label new chronic conditions and create a pill. The problem is that's led the medical system, because there's been a big growth in the medical system and all the stakeholders. That's led the medical system to silo disease. So now you have tens of thousands of different pills, tens of thousands of different medical codes that hospitals can build. When you go to med school, you have 42 specialties to choose from, 82 subspecialties. The problem is actually it's actually much more simple. It's food, we're poisoning ourselves. It's not just diabetes as a siloed condition, but the average American goes to, I think it's something like over 20 doctors, different types of doctors in their life.
28.
And that's just right. So I think that's helped the system. So do I think there's evil people conspiring? Maybe some, but not many. I didn't see many. I mean, a lot of people can go to sleep at night, but the food folks feel like they're creating cheap food and feeding America, even though feeding this poison to Americans isn't feeding them. And the pharma companies feel like they're treating conditions that people are really sick with. Nobody along the chain, which they are. I mean, like if somebody's extremely metabolic and unhealthy and overweight, and I actually am very skeptical of statins. I think the research is actually not great, but maybe a statin. I'm not against drugs per se, but it's a moral hazard because heart disease has only gone up as we've promoted statins. Why? Because the problem isn't that one biomarker of cholesterol. The problem is that the person is eating really bad inflammatory things, and it's going to cause other issues in the body.
It's just a marker of a deeper problem. It's just a symptom or a metric that shows the deeper problem, but that metric doesn't solve the problem.
Nobody is incentivized to talk about that. And it doesn't really have to be that way. It's a crazy thought, but American health policy could, be to keep people healthy. But the problem is the system's gotten so big that expanding healthcare has become a jobs program. In 78%, in 78% of U.S. states, the largest employer in the state is either a hospital or Walmart, the largest food retailer. There's huge momentum to keep these industries going.
I think Calley, for the listener who's kind of new to all of this, I would definitely encourage you to listen to the CrowdHealth episode. Andy, the founder of CrowdHealth, does a really good job breaking down the incentive structures of how insurance and providers kind of play and are kind of in this ever expanding cycle to increase healthcare spending in America. Kind of the nutshell version is health insurance companies have their profits capped on a percentage basis. So they can only take out of all the premiums paid, that's a total pie of 100%. Their sort of margin on that can be at most by law 20%. So if you let's say you collected $100 of premiums this year, at most my profit can be $20. If I want to increase my profit to $40, what do I do? Because I can't change the percentage. I have to now collect $200 of premiums, which means I have to spend 160 of those dollars on healthcare expenses, and then I can keep $40 as profit, which means I doubled healthcare expenditures in order to increase my profit. So Andy does a much better job than me in explaining that, but that's kind of how the incentives work.
It's a key point, and I think that's an important episode. I think most people miss this. Insurance wants costs to go up, which means people are sicker.
It's the opposite of other types of insurance. Other types of insurance, you would think an insurance company wants to, if you have a car insurance company, well, if people get in less accidents, you're really happy.
You're incentivized for that.
Premiums. Yep. That's why they do, you sign up for Progressive. They give you the little app to monitor your driving and see, how do you speed too much? Do you brake too fast? They're incentivized to keep you not getting in accidents so they can keep more of the premium and not pay it out. Health insurance doesn't work that way. And I think none of us understand that until you dive into how it actually works.
I've talked to health policy experts from Harvard who say they're talking about, well, insurance should be an ally. They want to keep costs down. That is, as you very eloquently stated, not correct. Literally. And to me,
literally not correct.
I could say this true, like every institution that impacts our health, you can take it to med schools. Med schools are attached to teaching hospitals. Usually the med school dean is also the head of the hospital, right? They have a system, right? And they also need funding for their professors to do research. Taking back to kind of my experience, the majority of funding for pharmaceuticals and other research, we talked about nutrition, comes from private industry. And I would just ask everyone to be like, kind of step back and just think about the incentives. Are those pharma companies, are those food companies donating billions of dollars to research to advance, nonpartisan, unencumbered scholarship on nutrition and, foundational science? I think it's manifestly not. And I can say, a lot of that strategy, right, is created by political consultants and consultants of like what university they should donate to. And I think we need to just be very aware of the incentives. I think this is a little bit uncomfortable because I think there's obviously a lot of dedicated doctors. There's some of the most educated and dedicated, hardest working people in the country. My sister who, was a surgeon and, very dedicated, dropped out because she was so horrified with the system and had a big influence on me. But a lot of my good friends are doctors, but they're not terrible people. They're dedicated, but we still have to be clear-eyed about the incentives, particularly, when it comes to the health. For me, it's about, it's cliche, but it's about kids. Kids are absolutely on the chopping block right now, and nobody's fighting for them. Certainly not healthcare companies.
Expand on that a little bit. Like in what way are they on the chopping block right now?
Yeah, so I come from a conservative background, right? The idea of personal responsibility means a lot to me, and I think a lot of the times these food and health companies talk about personal responsibility being the patient's fault. When you go into a classroom of 5-year-olds and see a large percentage of them are overweight and obese, that's not personal choice. There is something very systemically wrong happening. I don't know if you've ever seen kids around a birthday cake at a 3-year-old's birthday, jamming the sugar into the mouth. It looks like a group of meth addicts. It is just like very actually unsettling when you step back. These are highly addicted individuals. And it's so omnipresent, the sugar and the food and how it's weaponized. Even the most well-meaning parents can't escape from this. And I think feel very stuck. And it's impacting the kids' cells. It's getting them addicted to highly inflammatory foods. There's hardly a 3 or 4-year-old in the country who isn't going to throw or even younger, that's going to throw a fit, they want carbs, they want sugar instead of, vegetables, because the food is weaponized to get them addicted. And this is leading to, absolutely skyrocketing obesity and overweight among children. It's leading to record, just off the charts developmental issues. It's leading to off the charts allergies, which really weren't a thing before 1980 and have skyrocketed. Off the charts autoimmune conditions, all of these things happening at the same time. Again, it goes down to the mitochondria and the foundation of the cellular dysfunction. It's not, in my head, actually even that complicated. It's all tied to like literally 1 ton of genetic information of food that's going to these kids' mouth, which is totally weaponized. So it's a horrible problem for America. I think our future and our human capital. We have a mass epidemic of suicides and depression among teenagers. The number 2 cause of death for a teenager is suicide, and there's a huge iceberg below that of depression that's not normal. I think a lot of this is tied to diet. And just the last part I'll just kind of close with. Again, it's the food is really a problem, and then what is the medical system doing? Well, the medical system is, not to get too, but I'll just say it. I mean, there's millions of, now body surgeries, that we're talking about, and different things for teenagers and even preteens. There is now the American Academy of Pediatrics recommending surgery for kids as young as 12 who are obese. That's a lot of kids. The mental and physiological damage of having a massive surgery for something that's totally, and here's the key, is that surgery, they say that it makes you eat less. But if you're still pounding processed food, inflammatory oils, sugar, you're still not giving your cells what they need to thrive. You're still going to have massive issues down the road. It's a Band-Aid. And,
it's a highly profitable Band-Aid. There's a lot of things that come along with a surgery, the cost of that surgery that now the hospital or, or surgeon gets, the drugs that'll come on after that, for medications to manage your pain and everything post-surgery. And it's, to your point, it's another intervention. It's not what is the food and exercise regime we could try first with this child. It goes immediately to surgery, and it's diabolical actually on multiple levels, because
it's sad.
Because not only is it basically, it's essentially treating these kids like a product, because they're being milked for the profitability of them and of these interventions. But it goes even beyond that, because the surgery is not risk-free. And there will be complications for some of these kids, even if on a percentage basis you say, hey, it's 0.5% of the kids or 0.1% of the kids who get this surgery have some kind of life-altering complication. Even if you only have 1,000 surgeries, that's still one kid who's going to be life-altered. Like their life will never be the same. And you multiply that across all the people who have childhood obesity. You might be talking about hundreds or thousands of kids having life-altering problems as a result of this surgery.
It's heartbreaking. I truly get emotional, like thinking about my little son and him going into this world where they are targets. I know, chatting with leading, functional medicine experts whose, children are facing a lot of depression, and they're being highly, highly pushed to be on drugs, and some are. It's a tough environment to navigate. We're all defaulting to drugs. 15% of American high school seniors are on Adderall. Adderall, which, again, there might be a place for different, I'm not blanket anti-drugs, but Adderall, the book Blitzed is just fascinating.
Oh yeah.
It was created by the Nazis. It was literally created by it's one molecule away from crystal meth. It's what they gave German soldiers. Yeah. It's what they gave German soldiers. It's actually a less potent version than the Adderall kids take now. It's what German soldiers took to fight harder. And they discontinued it in the Nazi army because it led to mass psychosis when people took it too long. So it's just like, we're losing our way a little bit here. And unfortunately, just tying back to kind of the influence peddling, there's just not a lobbying group for kids. The American Academy of Pediatrics, which again, credentials pediatricians. This is not a fringe group. They can take a license away. They're the gold standard
The fact that they said that 12-year-olds should have surgery for obesity on a mass scale is an absolute scandal. And it's absolutely. You also mentioned another thing, Neil, like, this whole gaslighting on limited side effects, this, that. It's like we don't have any appreciation or awe for the human body and the metabolism and how our body works.
Absolutely.
It's like they literally said on a totally sham 60 Minutes episode about this weight loss, miracle weight loss injection, that it had low side effects. You actually look at the report, and more than 50% of people who've taken it have severe gastrointestinal issues. Now, serotonin, which regulates our happiness and mood, is produced, 95% of it's produced in the gut, not the brain. So whenever you have massive gastrointestinal issues, like if you have IBS, that's almost guaranteed that you're going to have some more depressive symptoms. So you're telling me there's no side effects when the majority of people have mass gastrointestinal issues, which, by the way, we don't even know why, but obviously because you're messing with the fundamental metabolism of humans with this injection, clearly some bad things are going to happen. You're going to have a rampant increase in depression. I mean, that's just obvious.
Which is already out of control.
Yeah, so it's unquestionable that this Ozempic drug is going to lead to more depression, given the severe gastrointestinal issues, which is always tied to increased depression because of the serotonin. So, I mean, to me, it is just a car wreck waiting to happen, and I am optimistic, though. I think it is important. It's been a big awakening for me to lay down the problem. But mathematically, this can't go on. We're going to go bankrupt as a country.
Right.
Healthcare is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States. We all know the statistics about the size of it, but really, I mean, it is growing at an increasing rate and will be 40% of GDP in about 15 years. Something has to give mathematically, and there are a lot of people, and I just, am proud to be one small foot soldier in this army, communicating about these issues and trying to put food. Again, a couple of years ago, this would have sounded fluffy to me, but like, we've got to put food at the center of medicine. We're not going to drug our way out of this problem. But I actually think there's an economic opportunity, and I think I'm optimistic because it has to be that way, because it's just the only solution. We have to get Americans healthier, or we're literally just going to go bankrupt and be a non-competitive country, which I don't think is going to happen long term.
Yeah, and not just the bankrupt part, but every single one of these people who is affected by this type of policy or these types of policies, I mean, that's like people's lives. That's their kids. That's their parents. Yeah. That's their siblings. Like, the stuff is, I mean, there's definitely a huge financial component, but it's also people's lives, and you don't really get that back. So it's, right. If your kid, gets screwed up by one of these surgeries, or like, becomes addicted to Adderall at 14 years old, like, you don't get that kid's life back. Like, the kid is kind of starting off from way behind, and they're kind of being screwed.
Yeah, Justin and I have talked about this a lot, starting our company, and I think people have been gaslit on this issue a little bit. I think, when you go to a public space, and I'm not trying to be too morbid here, but you go to a public space and you look around, there's a lot of people suffering. I see a lot of people that are obviously obese. I see a lot of people that clearly have some chronic conditions, dealing with depression. But I also see people like trying. I don't think people are systematically like. Do you think people are systematically 80% of adults trying to be overweight or obese? Like I don't think nobody wants that. There's a broken system. People want to be healthy. People want to be there to go to their child's wedding and see different milestones. This generation is now going to die earlier than the last for the first time. The life expectancy has been going down the longest period and most sustained period in American history since 1860. I just think I have a little bit more optimism for people than that. I think we're stuck in a bad system and lost our way. And I think, education is very important. Incentives are very important in some public policy. And I think personal empowerment is very important. I mean, again, I don't have all the answers by any means, but personally speaking, being on this health journey has been very personally rewarding. I mean, I think it's just interesting to explore and question, the system a little bit more and take, a little bit more ownership and questioning over what's happening in our amazing bodies and how we can, promote health for our family. I mean, it's a lot of people are on that journey. There's a lot of books being written, a lot of podcasts talking about it. I think the biowearable revolution is huge. In dozens of U.S. states, patients still aren't allowed to have their medical information, their medical records. We've totally walled off data from the patient, but now we're breaking through that. I think that's very important. So, I think there's a movement happening, but it's going to be a bottoms up. We've got to ask questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, and this might be a bit beyond the scope of what you're working on, but I think it's worth touching at least is, it's one thing, there's a lack of focus on the sort of top of this whole, I would say, actually rewording it a little bit, health is like downstream of food largely. I mean, there's a bunch of other factors, but food is certainly one of those factors that's kind of above or what your health results kind of flow from. But one of those things under food would be the food quality as well over, the last, call it 50, 75 years, whatever time frame you want to put on that. And I'm curious if you're familiar with this, or if you're not, we can skip this topic, but things like monocropping, glyphosate,
100%.
Like all these things. And just kind of the context for this is, my family, like I was born in the US, but my family is, immigrants. And one thing that people always comment who come here from, places like India, for example, is they'll say two things. And my grandmother stayed with us for 2020 during COVID. And so I was hearing this every day from her is one major thing she noticed is the fruit in America is a lot bigger and water filled than fruit in India. Like the size is just bigger, but it's not necessarily like it tastes worse to her. She didn't think it tasted better. She thought it tasted more watery. Like apples, for example, was a big one that she would always point at. And then the second thing is actually like the wheat. She was not a fan of even like whole grain, buying whole grain wheat and stuff in America. She just thought there was something off about it. And so that's just, one thing that I think is like, we talk about food, and these things actually make it that you're fighting a losing battle, because you can make, like, to your point of, you go to public space, people are trying, it's like people could be even trying to eat the right things, but if they're being poisoned by those right things, they're not going to see the results. There are things you can obviously do to improve that. We can talk about some of those solutions, but I think there's definitely like most people probably haven't even heard of regenerative farming or monocropping, and these things are, I think, also fundamental issues in this whole issue that we're talking about.
It's so key. It's so key, and I'm writing a book on this larger topic of metabolic health, but we're really, the soil and these aspects are actually extremely important. And just talking to my partner Justin, and he actually thinks it's worth a book, and said he wanted to write a book on, I think, an under-discussed issue, which is just the nutrients of our food have plummeted. If you take like a vegetable from today versus like 50 years ago in the United States, the nutrient profile is totally different. If you go to Sardinia, a country in, an island off the coast of Italy, and pick a tomato off the hill, by some nutrient levels, it's 9 times more in Sardinia.
Wow.
Like fundamentally. So this is an issue, another existential
So eating a tomato or an apple is not the same. Just like it's not an apple is not an apple, right? It depends on so many other variables too.
Well, just think about yourself, and think about a human that's an Olympic athlete that's working out, that's eating great protein, that's eating what their body's like, and then what a human who's like drinking not enough water and eating a lot of processed food. Like it's the same thing with the soil. You just have to get a little bit more connected to the food, and I think this is actually where it all comes together on environmental causes. I mean, people talk about environmental causes being an existential issue. It hasn't been the issue I've been on fire at, but I think it kind of ties this. It ties in a more selfish way to what we're being fed. The monocropping and the practice we use, to create these subsidized components to our processed food diet, which is basically grains and corn and certain crop, just those crops that go into processed food, and seed oils, but it's basically grains and corn. It has led to a devastation of the soil. Because it's just not how farming is supposed to happen. You're supposed to have, diversity. And there's an amazing documentary called Kiss the Ground, which I would recommend everyone. I never thought I'd be sitting around with the family watching. I would consider that kind of a hippie years ago, but it is one of the most powerful, impactful documentaries I've ever watched, that deeply goes into how these monocropping practices
have led to the soil, which is what gives our food nutrients. It's totally been depleted. You pick up a soil probably in India or one of these small family farms, and just crawling with trillions of different microbes and bugs, and it's alive. Here, it's turning into dirt, and that leads to. So the regenerative farming, movement is huge. I just took a visit to one in LA, our biggest little farm, which is another documentary, and that's a huge part of it. Our company now, we're doing doctor prescribed food as medicine letters, and I will say that this isn't perfect, but this is an argument for organic, right? Organic is not perfect. There's a lot of different opinions on that, but it's one. I was going to ask you about that.
It's on my list.
It's one start. It's one start of what a person can do. I think, think about organic selfishly. There's crazy amount of chemicals and bad farming practices used that's outlawed in most other countries. That are going into food, and that. So that's going into the microbiome, and those chemicals are causing unknown issues with us. The microbiome, this is a term being thrown a lot about, but it's in the gut. It's what regulates serotonin, as I talked about earlier. It's what basically regulates so much of our bodies, trillions of different bacteria cells. And you think about these compounds and these pesticides, they're showing real damage to the microbiome, which has a lot of different effects. So I think a start is to do organic. I think regenerative is going to become more and more popular. I think pasture raised is really good, for meat, and that means they're walking outside eating bugs, not just eating because the animals now for the most part are eating grain, which is GMO, right, and glyphosate. So it's a huge part of the puzzle, and we're trying to only recommend food, as we think about food that generates health, that has as least chemicals as possible on it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, I'm sure there are companies trying to game the organic and pasture raised and all these labels.
Yeah, sure.
But I think to your point, it's a step in the right direction. And you can there's probably, I don't know if this is a business to be made or it's a nonprofit idea, but there's probably some independent type of organization that could be built that would, verify these kinds of things. Because, I didn't know this, this is not from, anything that you guys would touch, but I didn't know until a couple months ago, there's no such thing as sushi grade fish. Mm-hmm. That's right. That is essentially a label. Let's put it this way. There's no organization deciding what sushi grade fish means. That's kind of up to whoever's selling you the fish to call it sushi grade or not. And so the recommendation was, hey, if you're buying from someone you trust and they're telling you it's sushi grade, that's great. Then it's right. And if, it's not someone you trust or it's just a grocery store, you might want to be a little more careful about that.
Well, it's legal to use food coloring and stuff in this, yep, which many people do. And,
yep.
Yeah, again, if you think too, that you can get a little despondent looking into all these ways we're rigged. But I think, again, working with our content, with our company, with our book, I think there are a number of steps you can start taking. I do think working to eat whole foods and really limit your seed oils, added sugar, and processed grains is a start.
That would get people really far.
I think that gets you far. Yeah. And then I think, another just point to close it, that Kiss the Ground makes is that it's a total misnomer to say that shifting farming practices would even be that much more expensive long-term. I mean, we've just kind of decided on these monocropping policies. There's not a huge even economic reason. We've just through some pretty corrupt practices. It's really a result of crazy farm subsidies and this push in the 1960s, as I mentioned, to make stuff packaged and shelf stable. It can be undone. And it goes into, you have the crops growing with the cows. Actually, a cow on a regenerative farm does not emit CO2. It's because there's so much going on. But a cow on a monocropping without, various plants around emits a lot of CO2. It's just it's a crazy rabbit hole to go into of how I think we really screwed up
how farming should work. But yeah, I mean, that's just, I think, a journey I think a lot of us are on, right? It's like you being a little bit more curious about this genetic information you're putting, like where did that food come from? But yeah, Whole Foods,
Yep.
Whole Foods, scan the label for sugar, seed oils, processed grains. You'll get 90% there.
Yep. And then probably there's another, few percentage points you can eke out with moving, just move around and find some activities that you like doing. I think that's another area that would help, not as much as food, but it would certainly help.
We've got to get food right. And we talk a lot about food. And I think we shouldn't be, Justin and I talk about this a lot, like we shouldn't be fool ourselves. I think sometimes actually what Coke does and what I helped with early in my career is they shift the discussion to exercise. Exercise is extremely important. We've got to get food right. If you're not getting your food right, and then you're exercising 2 hours, it's like that's a problem. But the pillars of metabolic health, the pillars in our opinion of medicine, are food, sleep, movement, chronic stress. I think those are the pillars of what impacts our cells. And I think they're simple things, but we've talked a lot about food, sleep. There's a lot of talk about sleep. The Why We Sleep book I would highly recommend, but there's a ton of research. And I would say, and I think most doctors would say this now, you should rather sleep that extra hour than exercise if you're choosing between. Like you've got to get the foundational sleep. It's crazy. My sister started Levels Health, they have millions and millions of glucose data points with what people are eating and how it's impacting. If you don't get like an hour or two extra of sleep or the right amount of sleep, your glucose, your impact of your good diet is totally out of whack. You've got to get the foundation of sleep. The sedentary lifestyle is an absolute scandal with kids as well. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. We're obviously becoming more sedentary, which is a huge problem. And not to undermine that at all. That is a huge, huge problem. And then chronic stress. I mean, there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, and I think the psychedelic renaissance is actually very important. I think it's a huge societal issue that 25% of the country is on a mental health medication. There might be a place for those at some points, and no judgment at all. And a lot of good friends and family members have been on those, but they are a numbing instrument. They do numb you from. To me, it's a further extension of not dealing with the root cause. So some of these modalities that deal with the root cause of trauma, I think, are more important, and we've kind of been shying away from that. But those are the four things. But those are four areas where corporate interests. Again, I love corporate. I think corporations. I think Coke should be able to sell Coke, but we should be speaking out about the dynamics of what's happening because we're kind of under attack on all fronts.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And well, I guess maybe now it's a good time to talk about like what you're doing at True Medicine and how do you guys, I'm sure this it's a massive problem. There's so many different fronts to kind of attack it on, but what piece of the puzzle are you guys working on? And then maybe what's kind of the long-term vision for where you guys go from here?
Yeah, there's a lot of foot soldiers needed in this. And we asked, Justin Mares, who you mentioned, we bonded over this topic of how do we make people healthier? How do we incentivize people to be healthy? It's a simple question, but so much is slanted against the American patient right now. Crappy food that we've talked about is subsidized, and then health insurance only kicks in once you're sick. We basically wait for you to get sick. How do we change those incentives? If we can chip away at the incentives, I think, we're going to get to a better place. So the policy instrument that we've become very excited about is the HSA, FSA, tax-free accounts. Excuse me. Now, these are something we've probably all heard of. Justin and I always ignored it. We clicked through it. But most Americans have access to these. It's where on open enrollment, you can have some money taken out of your paycheck pre-tax. So that's pre-income tax. That's like 30, 40% savings. And a family can have $7,200 a year. Now, a lot of people don't contribute to this because it's like some of it's use it or lose it, some of the instruments. And it's like, I don't know if I'm going to get sick. That's what's wrong with healthcare. We shouldn't be saving money for when we get sick. We actually are brewing metabolic dysfunction right now, and we should be incentivizing Americans to eat healthy, to sleep, to exercise, to take their supplements, things like that. What we found, what the regulatory insight that we found is that with a doctor's note, if a doctor says you should take more vitamin D, you should exercise, you need some help, and sleep to help sleep more, that counts as medicine. It counts for FSA, HSA spending. I actually don't think our company should be necessary because it should be manifestly obvious that these things are good for everyone. But the way it works right now is you need a doctor's note. So we have a very, very seamless process. We're actually going to be integrated right in the payment flow of some leading supplement brands, exercise brands. You take a couple questions and we'll be able to auto approve you and do that compliance work for that doctor's note. And then if you have an HSA, FSA card, and no, but none of these people are finalized, just as an example. But if you're buying your favorite supplement, if you're buying an 8 Sleep, we're not signed up with Peloton yet, but like just as an example, exercise equipment like that, you will be able to buy with your HSA right in the flow. It's going to be an approved payment option similar to PayPal and Affirm. So that's just our stab right now of making it as seamless as possible. And we do think there's an opportunity here. There's $140 billion currently sitting in HSA, FSA accounts, very under-optimized. A lot of people just load up on contact solution at the end of the year. If we can drive that spend to food as medicine, I think it helps chip away. And we really, it's been cool in the past week, with this expose about Coke. Even members of Congress have reached out and very excited about what we're doing. Really think it's good policy that we're pushing on and really trying to understand how to change the food system. Very conservative Congress people and very people on the far left. So I think there's this consensus around incentivizing food as medicine. This is one way we can do it right now, and True Medicine is trying to make that as seamless as possible. So I'm on Twitter at Calley Means, where we'll be, talking more about it, and you'll have True Medicine. .care is our website, and we're gonna be pushing that forward to save people money on food and exercise.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll put your Twitter and the website in the show notes for sure. So everyone should definitely check it out. You also have a book coming out, right?
Yeah. I mentioned my sister a couple of times. She's Dr. Calley Means, who's become a metabolic health outspoken person and on a lot of the podcasts. And her story really influenced me. I mean, she was the pride of the family, Stanford Med School surgery, and then was performing surgery 5 years into residency and realized she didn't know why people were sick, and realized that almost everything is tied to inflammation, which is tied to food. And there wasn't one nutrition class taught at Stanford Med School. And she abruptly left at the top of the game, started this company, Levels Health, got a platform. So we're the co-authors of the book. It's in her voice, and it's going to be weaving her story into really tangible tips around metabolic health, around kind of awakening on health. We're going to be publishing that with Penguin in about a year. It's a learning experience. That books take a while to get to press, but yeah, we're really excited, and I just feel very grateful to be carrying this message too.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. And maybe as that gets closer, we could do maybe a part
great.
2, but
As
we wrap up, a couple other things I wanted to touch. So, one thing we try to do on this show is really inspire builders, people who are trying to solve these problems by building solutions. Obviously you're doing that. A bunch of the other guests have done that. Are there opportunities that you've seen in health or in food that, as you've kind of explored the space, obviously you have the lane that True Medicine is going after.
Right.
Are there other areas that you've identified that you're like, hey, I wish somebody would go solve that problem, or that would be a really, cool area for someone to go explore further? Yeah.
So I'll give some high level concepts. If I had another $1 billion ideas, I'd probably be saving those. And I honestly don't know the exact answer. And startups are crazy, as you know. I mean, you kind of got to iterate. And I think I really feel good about right now that we're really wedded to the problem. We're really wedded to the problem of incentivizing healthy behavior. So here's my take on that. There is most idea generation and funding in healthcare is still going into the existing system. It's pills, Viagra delivered in a millennial pink package, but it's still, you're ordering pills. It's better UX for medical records, which is still just kind of in the existing system. It's little incremental changes and frankly, a lot of incremental pharma innovation. I think, okay, so the healthcare system needs to change. We need to get more root cause. We need to get more to food. That's a good moral argument. I think it's right. But I think it's an economic argument. I just can't kind of stop thinking about the math. like we are going to go bankrupt as a country based on healthcare spending, where we wait for everyone to get sick, fat, diabetic, heart disease, and then try to like manage their sickness and give them drugs that don't work. It's like it's not working. We're going to be a non-competitive bankrupt country. Like that's not hyperbolic. That's literally like mathematically like a certainty. It is an unsustainable path. So if you're really thinking about a trend to devote your life to and a 10, 20-year thesis, you're thinking about what's going to happen. How do we actually bring that curve back to normal? Like, how do we actually like start getting Americans healthier and costing our system less money? It has to, in my opinion, be from food and lifestyle habits. And I think there's, our FSA thing is the first thing, but I think there's going to be more and more money in public policy going to incentivizing food and health. So I think the food is medicine movement personally is a big thing, but just thinking about those incentives, like if you're thinking about health ideas, my pitch would be maybe not like an incremental change of how to sell into a hospital, some incremental thing like today, but where are things going? Like where if this math really is unsustainable, that means there's going to be a big crash, a big change. And I think it's going to happen quicker than we expect. So that would just be my pitch to kind of sniff around. And I don't think enough people comparative to the opportunity and are. And then I think investors who are on like a 10-year horizon from who we've talked to are aligned with that general thinking. And if you can paint what the future looks like and a good thesis there, I think there's a lot of appetite. So that's my pitch on health. It's got to be transformative. It's got to be disruptive to the current system, not feeding into it.
And kind of along those same lines, but with a different angle, if somebody's just an individual listening to this, or maybe they are a builder, but they're also thinking about their own individual health or their family's health, what's a good place for them, to start in terms of research, any blogs, books, videos, et cetera. And we'll put all of these in the show notes. If you don't have them off the top of your head, that's fine. We can obviously throw them in the show notes later. But yeah, any like top starting points for people who are they're listening to this and they're like, wow, this is crazy. I need to go learn more about this.
Yes. Well, we actually have a couple copies of this book, and I'm using it to prop up my computer right now because I'm at an office on the go.
Is this food fix?
Yeah, food fix.
Yeah.
So I would highly recommend this book by Mark Hyman, who this book and Dr. Hyman has had a huge impact on me and my sister. And now we're lucky to have him as an investor in the company. But Food Fix is one of the best systemic overviews of the connection between food and health. So I'd highly recommend that. I'd highly recommend books by Dr. Robert Lustig, 2 books called The Hacking of the American Mind, which really puts what's happening to diet, what's happening with social media and the chronic stress that's happening with kids there, what's happening with drugs. It puts it all kind of in the context of the child's mind, which I really think is the battlefield of where all this stuff converges. That book had a huge impact on me. I personally think, Robert Lustig is very prominent, and his books have sold a lot, but I think these should be some of the best-selling books in the country. They really had a huge impact on me. Hacking of the American Mind and Metabolical, which is his recent book, really about the metabolic crisis and how that's the underpinning of disease. My sister, Dr. Calley Means on Instagram, Dr. Casey's Kitchen, is super positive stuff, and what they're doing at Levels, both with the company and their content, is just amazing, and I think has had an impact on a lot of people. And frankly, the Levels blog, I mean, they are just a standard bearer of like they have invested a ton in highly technical but readable medical writing, and have hundreds of articles on almost any topic on kind of waking up from this. And I think the podcast circuit is very, very encouraging. I mean, you're talking about it, people that aren't focused on health specifically, from Joe Rogan on down, are talking about these issues. Peter Attia, Andrew Huberman talks a lot about this, has had a huge impact on me. And I just think being curious, and I know a lot of your listeners are, and I'm proud to be on that journey. The last thing I just say is I'm bullish on the biowearable revolution. I think it's up and down. I think there's a lot of companies that are probably going to fail in that space. But I think in 10 years, we're going to have a lot more biosensors we're going to be able to measure. I think we're going to have a much better dashboard on what our ketone levels are, what our hydration is, what our glucose levels are in real time. That's going to importantly give us actionable information.
The feedback loop will be tighter.
Yeah. Just like, hey, like you actually will feel tangibly better if you drink
more water right now. You should eat more fat right now. There'll be actually a little bit more tangible of a feedback loop. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like, I don't want to say the tide has kind of turned, but at least people are talking about it, and there is some momentum. And there's, a lot of companies like what you all are doing and what others are doing in the wearable space and some other areas that are actually, trying to fix a lot of these things. And I think the next few years are going to be super interesting in this, because you're right, it is an unsustainable situation and we have to solve it. That's kind of what it comes down to.
Got to solve it. And there's a lot of great entrepreneurs thinking about this, and I'm honestly optimistic.
Yeah, likewise. Well, Calley, this has been super fun. We will definitely have to do a part 2, maybe as the book gets a little closer. And maybe we can bring your sister on too. You guys can do like a joint,
all right, we'd love to,
episode
man,
or something.
I really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're doing as well. So everyone, check out the show notes. There's gonna be a lot of links in there, books, resources. True Medicine. Check that out and let us know what you think on Twitter. See you next time, Calley.
Thank you.